Hi everybody, I'm Marko, a white man. I have a very nice iGGi sweatshirt, and you've probably seen me here talking in previous years about very different things, like how I beat my sister in multiplayer games, or to what lengths you can go to win a game. So I'm known as the try-hard person of iGGi, at least in games. Well, this time I want to talk about something a bit different. I want to talk about something that can actually pass a peer review, and that's training multi-game agents. So this is actually my PhD topic, and the thing with this is that when you see these kind of images, when you see games that we train on, like yesterday we saw a keynote from Danny showing how you can train agents in very, very complex games. And you see these games that I show here, there is some kind of difference. These games are much more simple, right? And because of that, I can just condense all of reinforcement learning talk into this one slide. You start with a set of parameters theta. You start with some kind of neural network. You train it in an environment for 200 million steps, and then you get a new network that's kind of updated and that can now play this game of Space Invaders. 200 million steps is about 200 days of gameplay. So if you let your AI play 200 days of Space Invaders, it kind of learns how to play it. And this is not a problem anymore. This has been solved by DQN 11 years ago. This can be solved by an undergrad student in a week. So if this was all, I wouldn't be standing here. What is difficult is what happens if we want to try to add another game. So I want my agent that can play Space Invaders to now also be able to play Pac-Man. So I take the set of parameters theta, I train it in another game for 200 million steps, and I get theta 2 now. Now theta 2, we can continue with this process, right? We can get a new game. We can get a game of freeway, get theta 3, and so on and so on. And this is kind of an intuitive way of how we can add more games to our agent. So now our agent theta 3 can play freeway. But sadly, it can no longer play Miss Pac-Man or Space Invaders. In machine learning, there is a concept called catastrophic forgetting, where our agent can only remember the last environment that it was trained on, or last distribution that it was trained on, last data set it was trained on. So in this case, theta 3 forgot everything about all of the other games that it was trained on previously. So instead of training sequentially, if we want our agent to be able to play multiple games at the same time, we have to train it in parallel. So we start off with theta, and then we train it on Space Invaders, Freeway, and Miss Pac-Man all at the same time. Now, these three games are different. They have different mechanics. In Space Invaders, you have to dodge the enemy bullets, so dodge the circles. In Pac-Man, you need to collect the circles, so collide with the pellets, the circles. So there are different mechanics that we need to take into account. And because we are training all at the same time, these different mechanics interfere with each other. So Freeway wants to put our parameters in one direction, Space Invaders, different direction. And when we try to train it like this, there is a lot of negative transfer. Negative transfer means that one game negatively impacts the other game. And this is the problem, right? This is where we are right now. If we want to train on many different things at the same time, these different things can interfere with each other. So if we just purely aggregate all of the updates, we end up somewhere. Now that somewhere can drag us much further away from a game of freeway. We go into completely opposite direction. And these lines here, these vectors, are called gradients. So when we do reinforcement learning, we train our agents, we get gradients. Gradients are kind of like learning signals of how we want our model to change. And if our games are sufficiently different, the gradients will not be matching, so they will be pulling into opposite directions. And this is the problem. We don't want this. And there was a group of researchers, Chelsea Finn's lab, that says, yes, this is a problem. If we have gradients that are bigger than 90 degrees apart, they're conflicting. We call them conflicting. What if we, by design, make them non-conflicting? So we take blue gradient and we move it so that now it's orthogonal to the red one. We take the red one, make it orthogonal to the original blue one, and now we have two gradients that are non-conflicting. Problem solved, right? Well, not really. It solves the problem of conflicting gradients, but what we do is we change what's learned by our model. So our model is not actually learning what it needs to learn for Space Invaders, it's learning something that is a projection of what it needs to learn. So we lose a lot of components. And while it improves the results a little bit, there is still work to do. On the other hand, there are research that shows that scaling up is good. Usually machine learning bigger is better, right? GPT 3.5, billions of parameters. GPT 4, trillions of parameters, right? Just scale it up and it will be better. And from Google, some work done on multi-game decision transformers show that bigger is indeed better. They scaled up a small agent that's about 4 million parameters into a big one that's 200 million parameters, and they made it play 40 games at the same time. So they did manage to do all of the training. They didn't match the performance of a single task agent, so they were still not as good as we can get, but it was decent at what it did. However, they increased the size of the model 50 times, and they learned how to play 40 games instead of one. So there is a question here. Why didn't you just have 50 smaller models and put an if? If game number 1, use model number 1. If game number 2, use model number 2, right? So this scale kind of doesn't solve the problem that we have. And this is why I worked on something called Bootstrap Your Own Teacher. This is an algorithm that tries to create an agent, a single agent, that can play 40 different Atari games and not scale stuff up. And this is how it works. It consists of 2 phases. In phase 1, we take our model, our sets of parameters of our agent, we create a copy and send it for each specific game. So these red, yellow, green, blue agents that you see robots represent a specific agent training for a specific game. So maybe the first one is Space Invaders, second one is Freeway, third one is Pac-Man, blue one is Pong or whatever. We train those agents specifically for each game. And then we get 40 different experts that know their respective game. So red one knows how to play Space Invaders really well, yellow one knows how to play Pac-Man really well, and so on. And the only thing that's left to do now is to merge all of them together. And this is the hard part, right? If you remember the first image that I showed, there was a model. We had one environment, we train it for 200 million steps, and we get a model that can play that game. That's solved. This thing is not a problem anymore. So the first phase of this algorithm, this is nothing. The second phase is a bit tougher, because now we have 40 different experts, 40 different neural networks, and we need to cram all of them into one. And this is done through something called policy distillation, or we've done it with policy distillation. People do it in many different ways. Now, I'm going to quickly go over what policy distillation is. I'm not going to go into depth, but this is basically how it works. In policy distillation, there are 2 roles. You have a role of a teacher who knows how to play the game, and you have a role of a student who wants to learn from this teacher. Right? You can imagine yourself learning history, you have a history teacher, you want to learn what they know. And how it works is that you're playing the game, you come up to a situation, and you're asking your teacher, what would you do in this situation? How would you behave? What would be the actions that you do in this particular game state? And the teacher can give you an answer. It can tell you, I think 50% of the time I would move left, 20% of the time I would move right, 10% of the time I wouldn't do anything, and 10% of the time I would shoot. I don't know if that adds up to 100%, but who cares? You get the point. You get what's called an action distribution, or we call it a policy. This is a policy of how I behave in a specific game. And what policy distillation tries to do is for a student to match that specific policy. This is done by minimizing the distance between 2 distributions with KL divergence. The details don't really matter. What matters is the idea that I'm not trying to think what is the best thing I can do in this particular moment. It's what would my teacher do. And as a student, I do this for history, I do this for English, I do this for maths, right? Different teachers teach me different things in their own respective areas, in their own respective games. And if I can match all of them, then I've done my job. I've learned everything that there is to learn about all of my games, or all of my subjects. And this is how that works. First phase, I copy myself into 40 different games. Each of my copies become a bit better at their game. So I train it not fully until convergence, but let's say for 10,000 steps. Not too many, not too little, so that I have some incremental improvement. all of these 40 agents get incrementally improved, and then I try to combine all 40 of them into new me. I try to learn from all 40 of them. And then I come back to phase one. I copy myself, I improve myself, I squish myself into one. And I do this again and again and again until I get bored. Why does this work? Why is this a nice way to approach this? Well, first of all, I never mentioned what kind of agents we use, right? I mentioned we use, it's a framework, we train. I didn't mention if it's a big agent, small agent, we can choose. We can choose what we need for our purpose. If we choose smaller agents, we get very fast evaluation. Also, this can be done in two settings, in an online setting and an offline setting. These are RL terms. Online setting means I directly interact with the environment. Offline setting means I don't need the actual game. I can do this from a specific data set that I can just upload. And there is no reward hacking. This is something that Danny has talked about in the keynote. They did a lot of reward hacking because you need to tell your agent what to do and what not to do. With policy distillation, there is no what to do and what not to do. Copy what I do. That's the only rule. There are no rewards here that we need to learn. And it's a very rich learning signal. Remember when I talked about asking my teacher, what would I do in this game state? They didn't tell me jump or move left. They told me a full distribution of what they think they would do. And that's a much richer information than just tell me to jump. Because sometimes it's like 50-50. You can go left, you can go right, doesn't really matter. Right? If I tell you go left, you might not know that going right is also an additional possible option. And the final thing is it works because it works. This is something that I thought a lot in my PhD. There are many things that theoretically should work, practically don't. Luckily, this thing worked practically really well. The algorithm that I show, so my method is the green one. It would be awkward if it was the other way around. In the two graphs on the right, or on your left, you can see online methods. On your right, you can see offline methods. If you remember the one with gradients that we projected one node to another, that's the blue line here. If you remember the algorithm that scaled it all up to 200 million parameters, that's the cyan line there. So we can do much better. And yeah, as machine learning and reinforcement learning researchers, we usually look at the bars and say, this works and this doesn't work. So yeah, this works. And one more thing before I finish. This has been a lot of technical stuff, and I can go very deep into details and what did I try to work on and what worked and what didn't work and how did we make it work and how much time we... But that's not important. What's important is some takeaways that you can have if you ever decide to train an agent. First of all, even if a problem seems solved, there are always things to work on. If you ask a reinforcement learning researcher, is Atari solved? They will say yes. Because people showed 11 years ago, which is a huge amount of time in RL, that you can do this. However, there are always different things. You can train one agent to play one Atari game. Can you train one to play 40? Well, kind of. Even in the graphs that I showed, we didn't really match the performance of a single task agent. So still, training a single agent for one task is better than training a single agent for 40, which kind of makes sense. So there's always more things to do. And this multi-game RL is still an unsolved problem. The second one is that policy distillation in itself is not very much used. It's a very, I want to say old technique from 2016. But none of the recent methods have used it. And it's a very, very nice thing to copy somebody's knowledge. So if you have, in any of your problems, if you have multiple things that you need to combine into one, I believe that policy distillation is the way to go. And finally, something that I'm kind of happy about is that I didn't need to scale. As an academic researcher, I have a limited amount of resources. If I was in Google, I would just walk around and stumble upon 100 GPUs and then train a bigger model. I can't do that as an academic researcher. There is a limit of what we can do, right? So I can't go around and say, oh, 5 billion parameter models, bar goes up, right? We need to think about something different. We need to think about clever tricks. I'm not saying that scaling doesn't work. There are a lot of papers that show that scaling works. But the good thing about it is I can scale this very easily. I can swap in this 200 million parameter model if I had the resources, and show that probably it gets better and better and better. Thank you very much for listening. This is the full paper. As I said, it can pass a peer review, and these are my details if you want to talk to me after the conference. Thank you.